I have always felt that I was a reasonably assertive person, able to state what I wanted, to stand up to the face of conflict. However, once upon a time, I learned that there were limits to what I was able to do. It was when we were living in Dunnville, Ontario. And Dunnville had an annual festival in June called the Mudcat Festival. And I won't go into detail about the whole thing with the Mudcat. You just think about that for yourselves. But I drove downtown that day and parked in the alley. There was a nice parking spot there. And I went to see what the Mudcat Festival had, and it was really a very well-organized festival. They had dancers and acrobats and all kinds of stage shows, people doing different things. They even had a guy called Black Bart the Gunslinger. And Black Bart wore black boots and black pants and a black shirt and a black hat, and he had black 6 guns at his hips, and he was a real gunslinger. I don't know if there's that much of a call for that today, but he was great. And they had dancers, and they had singers, and clowns, and a wonderful parade, and all kinds of junky food to eat. And I had a wonderful afternoon enjoying all the festivities of the Mudcat Festival. And late in the afternoon, when it was time to go home, I went to get in my car, and someone had double parked and was blocking me in. Some annoying person with a little old blue Lada. Now, what kind of person would be still driving a Lada at that point? It's pathetic. But being a reasonably assertive person, I went over to the main organizational booth and I said, someone has double parked or blocked me in, and I want you to find out who owns that car and tell them to come over here and I will tell them to move it. And I might give them a piece of my mind while I'm at it. It's good to be assertive. You have to be like that in this world. And so they said, yes, sir. I'll tell you, they knew that I was in control of that situation. And they went off looking for whoever had parked and locked me in. They came back and I said, did you find out? And they said, yes. And I said, well, good. Get on the PA system and get them over here. And I said, by the way, whose car is it? So you already know. You know. They said, oh, that car belongs to Black Bart the Gunslinger. I'm rethinking my whole degree of assertiveness. And the guy was picking up the microphone, and I said, now just wait a second. I said, you know, Black Bart is a guest in our town. I don't think we have any need whatsoever to harass him with this minor situation. It's not that far for me to walk home. And I walked home that day. I can do a certain amount, but there are levels at which you say, I cannot face that enemy. The Apostle Paul was a very strong man. He could do a lot of things. He had been in lots of conflict. But even the Apostle Paul knew that there was a point at which you could not fight or resist anymore. And the Apostle Paul knew who the final enemy was, over whom we had no power. And he referred to the final enemy as death. He said, death is the final enemy. And there is no one who has the strength to stand up to death amongst all of humanity. Paul struggled with the question, why do we die? Why cannot we live forever in joy and bliss? Why are we human beings subject to death? And he gave the answer. He said, death comes because of sin, and sin comes because of one man, Adam. Adam sinned. He let sin come into the world. Through sin came death. And in Romans 5:12 it says that through that sin, death came to all of humankind. So now we are all subject to death. Now it's a difficult kind of passage because if you take it at face value, it looks like we are blaming Adam for all the troubles of the world. And if we could say, if only Adam hadn't committed that sin, then life would be so much better for us today. It's all Adam's fault. But that's not how we take those words. They have a deeper and more significant meaning for us than that. If you take the story of Adam and Eve in a literal sense, then it means that this world of ours is only 6,000 years old. And we Presbyterians tend to give a little more credence to modern sciences, and we recognize through archaeology and other studies that very likely the earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that human history extends far beyond a mere 6,000 years. What that means is that the story of Adam and his sin becomes something else, even as the Apostle Paul says, Adam is a representation of all humankind. And the important thing in the story of Adam is his nature and the way in which he was created, which made him prone to sin. The greatest and most momentous decision in the history of the whole universe came at the moment that God formed another living creature out of the dust and prepared to breathe life into it. When God came to that moment, he had a momentous decision to make. When he gave life to Adam, he could go one of two ways. God could have made Adam as an extension of God, as just a part of God, so that he would look like a sentient, individual, thinking being, but in fact he would not be. He would just be an extension or a part of God. And if God had done that, then Adam and all of us would be absolutely perfect. We would never sin. We would never be greedy. We would never lust. We would never hurt another human being. We would always be caring for others. And wouldn't that be a wonderful world in which to live? Except for one thing. We really wouldn't be alive. We would not have consciousness. We would not be living, sentient creatures. And God could have made Adam in that way. The other option was this, that God could make Adam and breathe life into him and make him something that was separate from God. Completely separate. Now, the downside of that is that if God were to make this new creature a separate creature, then the creature would be subject to sin, and greed, and lust, and hurt, and pain, and sickness, and even death. The upside is that a creature made separate would truly be alive and have self-awareness and consciousness. And God wrestled with that decision, saying, how will I make this new creation? But the whole reason why God wanted to make a new creation was because God believed that being alive was worthwhile. In spite of suffering, or death, or pain, or sorrow, or sin, or darkness, God believed that truly being alive was worth it. So God made the decision. I will make this other creature, but I will make it separate from myself. And I know that in doing that, I will make it subject to sin and pain and grief and death, but it will truly be alive, and that's what I want. That's how God made Adam. That's why Adam was sinful. That's why all of us are sinful, not because one man sinned, but because that one man is the representation of all humankind, a being made by God, separate, truly free, truly alive, subject to sin, and therefore subject to death. Before I move on, just two little points here that are very important for understanding the nature of humankind. The one is that sometimes we think that when God made Adam, that the evil part of Adam was the physical part. Because the physical world is bad, and the good part of Adam was the spiritual part, because the spiritual world is good. And sometimes even I fall into that trap. But that's not how it is. The physical world was made by God. The material world is good and blessed. The spiritual world has goodness in it as well, but both worlds have good and evil. So we don't make this divide saying that we are sinful because of our physical nature. We are sinful because we are separated from God. The second part of understanding sin is this, that the word that is used in the New Testament for sin has a very strange history. Its origin is in the Greek art of archery. And in archery, you're always aiming for a target. And when an archer would aim for a target that was here, and he would miss, and the arrow would land here, the distance between the target and where the arrow actually struck was called hamartia. And it meant the distance by which you missed, hamartia. And that's the word that's used in the New Testament for sin. It is the extent by which we have missed the goal for which we were intended, by which we have missed what we should have been. And so we're left with this great problem, that in the whole balance of the universe, someone has to pay the price for the hamartia, or for that distance by which we missed the target. Someone has to make that up. And this is where we come to the next powerful story in the Bible. We have Adam, who is the means by which sin and death came into this world by virtue of his separateness. But now we have to have another story or another accounting saying, who will make up for that distance? And of course, when God looks at his people and says, I'm glad I made them separate. I'm glad I made them truly free and individual, but I see that they have sinned. Who will pay the price for their sins? And God says, I will pay the price. I will become flesh. I will dwell in the midst of them. And in the person of my Son, Jesus Christ, I will pay the price for their sin. And therefore I will redeem them from that inevitable death that comes with sin. I will give them eternal life. And that's the meaning of the story of Jesus Christ on the cross of Calvary. That story to which we are heading on Good Friday a few weeks from now. It is the place where God says, I made you separate. I know that you can sin and that you will sin, but I will redeem you. So even as death came into this world by the sin of one man, Adam, so salvation comes into this world by the sacrifice of one man, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the embodiment of God, who says, I will pay. In spite of all that you have done, I will pay. So we have two things at least to give wonderful thanks for today. Number one, we give thanks for the fact that God made us free. And I hope every one of you affirms God's decision on that matter, that you're all saying, I'm glad I am not just an extension of God or a puppet moved by God. I am glad that I am free, because that means that I am alive and I can experience what it is to be fully alive. That's the gift that God has given you firstly. And we give thanks for the second gift when we say, because of my freedom, I am sinful and broken and corrupt. But through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice, God has given me a way out of death, a way to be forgiven of my sins. Good Friday and Easter are coming. I hope that she will recognize the incredible power that is in those stories and live with thanksgiving and joy for them, now and forever.